America loves to talk about its green future, clean energy, carbon offsets, tech billionaires building eco-utopias in the desert. But if you look beyond the corporate press releases, you'll find a different map, a map drawn in chemical runoff and radioactive dust. There are zip codes in this country where the American dream didn't just die, it became toxic. In these towns, the air you breathe isn't just a basic human right, it's a calculated risk. We're talking about places where the cancer rate is 50 times higher than the national average. Locations where the ground has been on fire for 60 years, and the government's solution was to simply stop sending mail. These aren't natural disasters. These are sacrifice zones. Places where policymakers and billionaires decided that some people's health was an acceptable cost for a corporation's quarterly profit. From the chemical corridors of Louisiana to the lead-soaked soil of Oklahoma, these are the towns that were used up, poisoned, and then managed into extinction. You think you know your country? You don't. Not until you see what's buried under these zip codes. Today, we're going beyond the map to find the 10 most toxic places in America. Fair warning, once you see these numbers, you'll never look at a for sale sign the same way again. Let's go. We start in Reserve, Louisiana, a town that proves poverty in America isn't just about money. It's about being assigned to a sacrifice zone. Welcome to the 70084 zip code, a town sitting inside a 130-mile stretch of land known as Cancer Alley. But Reserve isn't just another stop on this industrial corridor. It is its beating, toxic heart. In the 70084 zip code, the air doesn't just smell like chemicals, it smells like a calculated sacrifice. This town is home to the only plant in the United States that produces chloroprene, a key ingredient in neoprene rubber. According to the latest federal EJ Screen report, the toxic releases to the air in this single zip code aren't just high, they are 71 times the national average. While your daily weather app might show a good air quality index of 23, the government's own underlying data ranks this area in the 99th percentile for toxic exposure. The smog might clear, but the invisible chemicals stay locked at 7,000% above the norm. This is a geography of inequality that the system refuses to fix. Even in 2025, after decades of petitions, the lifetime cancer risk here remains a staggering 50 times the national average. Why do people stay? Look at the numbers. The unemployment percentile here is at 93%. In Reserve, the choice isn't between a good job and a bad one. It's a choice between starving today or getting sick tomorrow. The most haunting part of Reserve isn't the smoke. It's the proximity. You have elementary schools and family porches sitting in the literal shadow of massive chemical reactors. The people living here are mostly descendants of enslaved people who worked these same lands when they were sugar plantations. Today, the masters have changed, but the extraction continues. The sugar is gone, replaced by chloroprene. The labor has been replaced by emissions. Residents here describe the air as heavy, a thick, sweet metallic scent that sticks to your clothes and follows you into your sleep. For decades, they've been told the levels are acceptable, but as the rows of graves in the local cemetery grow longer with names of people who died too young, the word acceptable starts to sound like a death sentence. In Reserve, you aren't a citizen, you're an environmental externality. This is what managed extinction looks like in 2026. Leaving the chemical corridors of the South, we head into the heart of the Great Plains, to a place that has been legally and physically erased from the United States. Our next location is Picher, Oklahoma, zip code 74360. In most of the towns we cover, people are fighting to stay. In Picher, the government paid everyone to leave, because here, the very ground beneath your feet is a weapon. For a century, Picher was the engine of American wars. It provided the lead for the bullets fired in World War I and II. But when the mining companies left in the 1960s, they left behind a landscape that looked like another planet. Massive, 200-foot mountains of chat, toxic mining waste, still tower over the town. For decades, children played on these white dunes, unaware they were breathing in concentrated lead, arsenic, and zinc. By the time the EPA declared this a Superfund site, the damage was irreversible. In the 1990s, nearly 35% of the children in Picher tested positive for lead poisoning, facing permanent brain damage and learning disabilities. But the poison wasn't the only reason the zip code 74360 was deleted. The town was hollow. A century of unmapped mining had left Picher sitting on a honeycomb of empty caverns. In 2006, a federal study confirmed the nightmare. The town was literally sinking. Entire blocks were at risk of dropping into massive underground voids at any second. The government launched a massive buyout, moving thousands of residents and eventually declaring the town uninhabitable. Today, Picher is a grid of cracked asphalt and concrete foundations. In 2009, the post office closed. In 2013, the city was officially disincorporated. When you look at a map of Oklahoma today, you might see a blank space where Picher used to be. It is the ultimate example of extraction economics. Once the lead was gone, the people were an inconvenience. In Picher, the American dream didn't just fade away, it fell through the floor. Leaving the sinking voids of Oklahoma, we travel east to the cold country of Pennsylvania. Our next location is zip code 17927, Centralia. In most ghost towns, the silence is cold. But in Centralia, the ground is warm to the touch. Underneath these cracked streets, a fire has been burning since 1962. It isn't a forest fire, and it isn't on the surface. It's a coal mine fire, moving like a slow-motion beast through the veins of the earth. The tragedy began with a simple cleanup. To prepare for Memorial Day, the town council decided to burn trash in a local landfill, a landfill that happened to sit directly over an abandoned strip mine opening. The fire seeped into the anthracite coal seams. It moved from the landfill into the maze of tunnels that ran beneath the entire town. For years, residents tried to ignore it. They thought the smoke in their backyards was just steam. But by the late 1970s, the carbon monoxide levels in local basements began to hit lethal levels. The turning point came in 1981, when a 12-year-old boy named Todd Domboski fell into a sinkhole that suddenly opened in his grandmother's backyard. He was saved, but the hole was 4 feet wide and 150 feet deep. The steam rising from it contained lethal levels of carbon monoxide. Congress eventually stepped in, declaring the town a lost cause. They allocated $42 million to relocate the entire population. In 1992, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania took the ultimate step. They declared eminent domain over every building in town. In 2002, the U.S. Postal Service officially revoked the zip code 17927. The government didn't just move the people, they deleted the address. Today, only a handful of residents remain, having fought a decades-long legal battle to die in their own homes. Centralia is a warning of what happens when a small human error meets an inexhaustible fuel source. Experts say there is enough coal in these mines to keep the fire burning for another 250 years. It is a town that was literally managed into extinction because the very earth beneath it became a furnace. In Centralia, the map says there's nothing here, but the smoke rising from the asphalt says otherwise. Moving deep into the American South, our next stop is a town that looks like the picture-perfect image of small-town USA. This is Anniston, Alabama, zip code 36201. But for 40 years, this town was the site of a silent, invisible massacre. While residents raised their children and planted their gardens, a global chemical giant was pumping millions of pounds of toxic waste into their water and soil, all while knowing exactly what it would do to them. From 1929 to 1971, the Monsanto plant in Anniston was the world's leading producer of PCBs, chemicals used in everything from electrical transformers to paint. By the 1960s, Monsanto's own internal documents admitted that PCBs were a global contaminant that caused systemic toxic effects in humans. Did they warn the town? No. Instead, they continued to dump toxic sludge into the local creeks and landfills. It wasn't until a legal battle in the early 2000s that the truth came out. The soil in some backyards was so saturated with PCBs that it was legally classified as hazardous waste. The tragedy of Anniston isn't just in the soil, it's in the people. Studies conducted after the scandal broke found that residents of Anniston had PCB levels in their blood hundreds of times higher than the national average. Like Reserve, Louisiana, the most affected areas were the low-income, predominantly black neighborhoods closest to the plant. These families were trapped in a toxic debt they never asked for, facing soaring rates of cancer, liver disease, and developmental issues. Monsanto eventually paid a $700 million settlement, but money can't clean your DNA. Today, the Monsanto sign is gone from Anniston, replaced by new logos and corporate spin. The facility now produces the active ingredient for Tylenol, pain relief for a nation. But for the people of zip code 36201, the pain Monsanto left behind has no remedy. The company stopped making PCBs in 1971, but they left thousands of tons of it buried in the hillside, still seeping into the soil while children play just blocks away. Anniston is a reminder that a zip code can be poisoned long before the government decides to erase it from the map. In zip code 36201, the profit was private, but the poison was public. In this town, the grass is green, but the history is toxic. Our fifth stop takes us to the edge of Route 66, to a place that technically no longer exists as a town. This is Times Beach, Missouri, zip code 63025. In the 1970s, this was a working-class summer getaway. But today, the only residents here are the trees and the ghosts of a massive environmental blunder. This town wasn't destroyed by a flood or a fire, it was destroyed by a man hired to keep the dust down. Times Beach was a poor town with unpaved roads. To solve the dust problem, the city hired a contractor named Russell Bliss to spray oil on the streets. What they didn't know was that Bliss had been paid by a chemical company to dispose of their waste. He mixed that waste, full of dioxin, one of the most toxic man-made chemicals known to science, with used engine oil and sprayed 160,000 gallons of it directly onto the streets where children played and dogs ran. The effects were immediate and gruesome. Horses in local stables began to drop dead. Birds fell from the sky. Residents complained of skin lesions and constant headaches. In December 1982, just before Christmas, the Merrimack River flooded, spreading the dioxin-laced oil into every home and basement in the city. The EPA arrived in hazmat suits and delivered a chilling message. If you live here, you must leave. Now. And you can never come back. The federal government eventually bought every single home and business in the town for $33 million. By 1985, the town of Times Beach was officially disincorporated. The zip code 63025 was assigned to a nearby area, but the land where the town stood was scraped clean. They built a massive incinerator on site to burn 265,000 tons of contaminated soil. Today, the site is a state park. You can hike and bike where families once lived, but if you look closely, you'll see the outlines of streets that lead to nowhere. Times Beach is a reminder of how fragile a community is when the ground it's built on becomes a poison. In this park, the air is clean, but the map remains empty. Leaving the empty parks of Missouri, we drive into the agricultural heart of California. This is Kettleman City, zip code 93239. On the surface, it looks like a typical pit stop for travelers on Interstate 5. But for the 1,500 people who live here, it is a place of genetic terror. This town is home to the largest hazardous waste facility in the western United States, a site that accepts everything from PCB-contaminated soil to heavy metals, just miles from where people sleep. The nightmare began between 2007 and 2010. In a town of just 1,500 people, at least 35 babies were born with major birth defects, including cleft palates and missing organs. The mothers in Kettleman City knew something was wrong. They drank the same tap water and breathed the same dust from the massive waste trucks passing through their streets every day. But when they asked the government for help, they were met with a wall of silence. Because most of the residents spoke only Spanish, the official hearings were held in English, effectively silencing the very people who were suffering. State health officials eventually conducted a study, but the results felt like a second betrayal. They concluded that while the birth defects were real, there was no definitive link to the waste facility. But the community pointed to the numbers. The facility was permitted to dispose of hundreds of thousands of tons of toxic waste annually. For years, the town's drinking water was contaminated with high levels of arsenic. In Kettleman City, the burden of proof was placed on the mothers, not the multi-billion-dollar waste corporations. Today, the waste facility is still there, and it's even been expanded. The government eventually provided a new water filtration system, but for the families who lost their children, the damage is permanent. Kettleman City is the textbook definition of environmental racism. It is a town where the zip code determines how much your child's life is worth to the state. In 93239, the trucks keep coming, and the map shows a town that is still acceptable, as long as you aren't the one living in it. Our final stop takes us to the edge of the world-famous Niagara Falls. This is Love Canal, zip code 14304. On the map, it looks like a quiet residential grid. But beneath this soil lies a legacy of corporate greed and municipal negligence that changed American law forever. This isn't just a ghost town. It is the site of the greatest environmental disaster in U.S. history that wasn't caused by an accident, but by design. In the 1940s, the Hooker Chemical Company used an abandoned, unfinished canal to bury 21,000 tons of toxic waste, including benzene, dioxin, and PCBs. By 1953, the canal was full. They covered it with dirt and sold the land to the local school board for exactly $1. The contract contained a chilling clause. It warned of the buried chemicals and legally shielded the company from any future lawsuits. On top of this chemical bomb, the city built an elementary school and a neighborhood of 900 homes. The nightmare surfaced in the 1970s after a period of heavy rain. Residents began to notice black, oily sludge seeping through their basement walls. In backyards, rocks would spontaneously combust when kids played with them. The health data was horrific. A local mother named Lois Gibbs discovered that her son's school was built directly on the landfill. She began a door-to-door survey and found a trail of miscarriages, birth defects, and rare cancers that the authorities tried to ignore for years. It took the residents kidnapping 2 EPA officials in 1980 to finally force President Jimmy Carter to declare a federal emergency and relocate 800 families. Love Canal was the breaking point. The national outrage over this toxic time bomb forced Congress to pass the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation and Liability Act, CERCLA, better known as the Superfund Program. It was a law designed to make polluters pay for their mess. Today, the center of Love Canal is a tomb, a 16-acre area capped with plastic and clay, containing the same 21,000 tons of waste that were buried 80 years ago. As we look across the 7 cities we visited, from the chemical corridors of Louisiana to the sinking mines of Oklahoma, we see a pattern. The Superfund was meant to fix this, but in 2026, many of these zip codes are still waiting for their $1 debt to be paid. In the end, the map doesn't just show where we live, it shows what we're willing to sacrifice.